A mafia boss caught his maid washing dishes at 2 some a.m. But what he discovered next, it wasn't soap in that water. It was holographic surveillance technology, and it changed everything. Tell me, where in the world are you watching from right now? Drop it in the comments below. If you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. We bring you powerful, emotional stories with twists you'll never see coming. Stories that stay with you long after the screen fades to black. Now sit back, take a deep breath, and step into the world of Gavin Howard, a 45-year-old Mafia kingpin who thought he'd seen every betrayal, every lie, every angle. And Melanie Rogers, a 27-year-old federal agent living as his maid, collecting evidence that could destroy him. This is the story of the moment at 2:01 a.m. when a holographic glow in the darkness revealed that everything both of them believed was a lie. Because sometimes the enemy isn't who you think. Sometimes justice wears a criminal's face. And sometimes the person sent to destroy you becomes the only one you can trust. Gavin Howard hadn't slept properly in 3 weeks. Not since the Castellano family tried to muscle in on his waterfront operations. Not since he'd put 2 of their soldiers in the hospital and sent Vincent Castellano a message that couldn't be misunderstood. At 45, he'd learned that power came with a price: constant vigilance, endless paranoia, and nights that stretched out like open wounds. He stood at the window of his bedroom, barefoot on imported Italian marble, watching the city lights blur into nothing. The mansion was silent. 23 rooms, 48 windows, and not a sound except the gentle hum of central air conditioning. His security team changed shifts at 2 a.m. He'd checked the monitors 15 minutes ago. Everything was clear. Everything was as it should be. Then he heard it. A soft clink, then another. Rhythmic. Deliberate, coming from somewhere deep in the house. Gavin's instincts fired instantly. His hand moved toward the nightstand where he kept his Glock, then stopped. This wasn't the sound of an intruder. This was something else. He slipped on a black t-shirt, left the gun behind, and moved through the darkened hallways with the silent precision of a predator who'd spent decades hunting and being hunted. The sound grew clearer as he approached the kitchen. Running water, the scrape of porcelain against steel. Someone was washing dishes at 2:00 in the morning. He pushed open the heavy kitchen door without making a sound. There she was. Melanie Rogers stood at the industrial sink, her blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail that had half fallen loose, strands clinging to her damp neck. She wore her blue maid's uniform, the one with the crisp white collar and sensible buttons, but it looked wrong somehow. Too pristine for the hour, too composed for someone who should have left 6 hours ago. Her hands moved mechanically through a mountain of dishes, scrubbing, rinsing, stacking. But it was her face that stopped him cold. There was an eerie blue glow reflecting off her features, pulsing softly like bioluminescent water. The light came from the sink itself, from something in the dishwater that wasn't soap. Wasn't anything that should exist in a kitchen at 2 a.m. Gavin's eyes narrowed. He'd spent 25 years reading people, spotting lies before they left someone's mouth, identifying threats before they materialized. And right now, every instinct he possessed was screaming that something was catastrophically wrong. Melanie must have sensed his presence because her hands froze mid-scrub. The blue glow intensified for just a second, then vanished completely as she made some subtle movement he couldn't quite track. When she turned to face him, there was nothing in the sink but soapy water and dishes. Nothing unusual. Nothing technological. Nothing that could explain what he'd just seen. But her face told a different story. Her eyes were wide, Not with surprise, but with fear. The kind of fear that came from being caught, doing something that could get you killed. Her chest rose and fell too quickly. One hand gripped the edge of the sink so hard her knuckles had gone white. "Mr. Howard," she said, her voice steady but breathless. I couldn't sleep. I thought I'd finish up the dishes from the dinner service. I didn't mean to disturb you." Gavin didn't respond immediately. He just stood there, studying her with the cold, calculating stare that had made hardened criminals confess to crimes they hadn't committed. He watched her throat work as she swallowed. Watched her left hand drift down to tug at her sleeve. A nervous gesture, unconscious, revealing. That's when he saw it. The fabric pulled back just enough to expose the edge of her wrist. There, barely visible in the dim kitchen light, was a faint discoloration. Not a bruise from manual labor. Not a cooking burn. It was the unmistakable mark of someone who'd been wearing something tight and technological for extended periods. The kind of mark left by surveillance equipment. Melanie caught his gaze and yanked the sleeve down with too much force, too much panic. Her other hand continued gripping the sink like it was the only thing keeping her upright. "At 2 a.m., Gavin said finally, his voice dangerously quiet. "You're washing dishes at 2 a.m., with your face lit up like a computer screen?" "The overhead light," she started, "wasn't on when I walked in." Silence crashed between them like a physical force. Melanie's jaw tightened. She didn't answer, couldn't answer, because they both knew she'd been caught in a lie, and there was no good explanation that wouldn't make things exponentially worse. Gavin held her gaze for 5 more seconds, long enough to let her know he'd seen everything, long enough to watch the fear in her eyes transform into something harder, more desperate. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away. He didn't look back. Didn't need to. He could feel her staring at him as he left, could practically hear her heart hammering against her ribs, could sense the calculations running through her mind as she tried to figure out how much he knew and how much danger she was in. Plenty on both counts. Gavin walked straight to his study, closed the door, and pulled up the security protocols on his private server. Someone had planted her in his house. Someone had given her access, credentials, a cover story good enough to pass his initial vetting, which meant this wasn't some random operation. This was targeted. Sophisticated, professional. He pulled up her employment file. Melanie Rogers, 27 years old, hired 8 months ago through a staffing agency that specialized in discreet household help for high-net-worth individuals. References checked out. Background clean. Too clean, now that he thought about it. No social media presence, no digital footprint beyond the basics. Like someone had built her identity from scratch. His fingers moved across the keyboard, pulling up camera feeds, reviewing logs, cross-referencing her movements against known patterns. He'd find out who sent her. He'd find out what that blue glow was. He'd find out every secret she was hiding, because Gavin Howard hadn't survived 2 decades at the top of New York's underworld by ignoring warning signs. And Melanie Rogers, with her trembling hands and her holographic surveillance equipment hidden in dishwater, was the biggest warning sign he'd seen in years. And when something didn't sit right with Gavin Howard, it didn't stay quiet for long. Gavin didn't confront her. That would have been the amateur move, the kind of mistake that got people killed in his world. Instead, he watched. For 3 days, he became a shadow in his own house, observing Melanie Rogers with the same cold precision he'd once used to dismantle the Moretti family's loan sharking operation. She was good, professionally trained, methodically careful. She moved through the mansion with the practiced ease of someone who'd memorized every security camera angle, every blind spot, every moment when the guards changed positions. Her cleaning routine was flawless, too flawless. Nobody dusted the same bookshelf twice in one day unless they were installing something behind the books. Gavin stood in his study at dawn on the fourth day, reviewing footage from cameras Melanie didn't know existed. The ones his paranoia had installed years ago, the ones not listed on any security schematic. There she was, kneeling beside the antique credenza in his office, her hand moving with surgical precision as she attached something smaller than a dime to the underside of the wooden panel. A micro camera, he guessed, maybe a listening device. The blue glow from her wrist, barely visible but unmistakable, suggested she was syncing it to something technological, something that didn't belong in a simple maid's toolkit. He picked up his phone and called Marco Delgado, his tech specialist, and the only person in his organization he trusted with electronics. "I need you at the house. 1 hour. Bring your scanner." Marco arrived exactly 60 minutes later, a thin man in his 30s, with the nervous energy of someone who understood that working for Gavin Howard meant being either indispensable or dead. He swept the study in silence, his handheld device emitting soft chirps as it detected signal after signal. When he finished, his face had gone pale. "Boss, this is FBI hardware. Military-grade encryption. Whoever planted this isn't just law enforcement, they're federal, high-level federal." Gavin absorbed the information without visible reaction, though his mind was already 3 moves ahead. The Bureau had sent someone young, female, attractive enough to blend in as household staff, but capable enough to deploy sophisticated surveillance equipment. The question wasn't whether Melanie was an agent. The question was who had authorized the operation and what they really wanted. "Leave the devices active," Gavin said. "I want them to think they're winning." He spent the next 2 days feeding Melanie exactly what she wanted. Phone conversations about shipments that didn't exist, meetings with associates who weren't really associates, a carefully constructed fiction that would waste the FBI's time while he figured out the real angle. Because there was always a real angle. Nobody sent a federal agent undercover for 8 months just to gather evidence for a standard RICO case. This was personal. This was targeted. This was about something bigger than his waterfront operations. Meanwhile, Melanie continued her mission, unaware that every device she'd planted was now feeding Gavin information about what the FBI considered important. He watched her through his hidden cameras, studying not just her actions, but her tells. The way she bit her lower lip when she was nervous. The way her left hand trembled slightly after particularly dangerous installations. The way she stood frozen in the hallway sometimes, as if questioning everything she was doing. On the 6th day, Gavin's private phone buzzed with an encrypted message from his contact inside the telecommunications company. Someone matching Melanie's description had made 3 calls to the same untraceable number in the past week, always from burner phones purchased at different locations across the city. The conversations were short, coded, professional. But the location of the last call was interesting, a pier on the east side, the kind of place people went when they didn't want to be seen. That night, Gavin positioned himself in the shadows near Pier 47, watching the water lap against rotting wood pilings. At 11:03 p.m., a black sedan arrived. A man in his 50s emerged, silver hair catching the streetlight, posture rigid with authority. Federal agent, Gavin knew immediately. Something about the way they carried themselves, like they'd internalized the weight of institutional power. The man lit a cigarette and waited. At 11:08, another car arrived. Gavin's blood turned to ice. Vincent Castellano stepped out of the passenger seat, flanked by 2 bodyguards. The same Vincent Castellano who'd tried to kill Gavin 3 weeks ago. The same Vincent Castellano, whose family had been at war with Gavin's organization for the better part of a decade. And now, here he was, shaking hands with Melanie's FBI handler, like they were old friends conducting business. Gavin pulled out his phone and began taking photographs, his mind racing through implications. This wasn't standard law enforcement. This was collaboration. This was corruption. The federal agent said something that made Vincent smile. Cold, predatory. Then Vincent handed him an envelope, thick enough to contain either cash or documents. The agent checked the contents, nodded, and the two men spoke for exactly 4 minutes before separating. Gavin stayed hidden until both cars disappeared, then walked back to where he'd parked 3 blocks away. His hands were steady on the steering wheel, but inside, calculations were accelerating. A federal agent working with his mortal enemy. An undercover operation that had all the trappings of legitimacy, but was clearly something else entirely. And Melanie, caught in the middle, either a willing participant in corruption or an unwitting pawn in someone else's game. He thought about her face at 2 a.m., illuminated by that blue holographic glow. The fear in her eyes when she'd been caught. Not the fear of a corrupt agent exposed, but the fear of someone who knew she'd stepped into something dangerous and couldn't get out. Gavin had been in the game long enough to recognize when pieces didn't fit. And this entire operation? Nothing fit. Which meant someone was lying. The question was whether Melanie knew she was being lied to or whether she was part of the lie itself. He'd find out soon enough. Because when your enemy meets with a federal agent in the dark, someone's about to die. Gavin just needed to figure out who before the body turned out to be his. Melanie had followed Marcus twice before without him knowing. The first time was instinct, something about his phone call in the parking garage, the way he'd lowered his voice when she'd walked past. The second time was confirmation that her instinct was right. Tonight was necessity. She stayed 3 cars back as his sedan wound through the industrial district, her heart hammering against her ribs with a rhythm that felt like accusation. 6 months of training, 6 months of mission discipline, and here she was tailing her own handler like he was the criminal. But something was wrong. Something had been wrong since that conversation 3 days ago, when Marcus had pushed her to accelerate the timeline, to plant evidence she hadn't verified, to cut corners that federal agents didn't cut unless they were desperate or dirty. The sedan pulled into the same pier where Gavin had photographed them, though Melanie didn't know that yet. She parked 2 blocks away and approached on foot, staying low, staying invisible. The techniques they'd taught her at Quantico now turned against her own agency. She heard them before she saw them. Vincent Castellano's voice carried across the water, harsh and confident. Walsh will be dead by Thursday. Your girl plants the weapon Wednesday night and Howard takes the fall. Clean, simple, permanent. Melanie's blood turned to ice. Federal Judge Catherine Walsh. She'd heard Marcus mention Walsh's name in passing, something about a pending case, routine court business, but this wasn't routine. This was assassination. She crouched behind a shipping container, pulled out her phone, and began recording. Every word. Every damning syllable. Marcus's response was calm, almost bored. And the girl won't be a problem? The girl meant her. Melanie's hand trembled, nearly dropping the phone. Vincent laughed, cold and cruel. Rogers? She'll be collateral damage. Make it look like Howard killed her when she discovered what he'd done. 2 birds, 1 frame job. Your bureau gets their conviction, I get my territory, and we both get very rich. Marcus didn't hesitate. Then we're agreed. The hit goes down Thursday at 10 p.m. Howard will be at his warehouse meeting. Standard schedule, predictable. My team raids 30 minutes later, finds the weapon, finds Rogers's body, and Howard spends the rest of his life in a cell. Or gets shot, resisting arrest. Either works. Melanie couldn't breathe. The man who'd recruited her, who'd sworn her oath alongside her, who represented everything she'd believed about justice and law enforcement. He was planning to murder a federal judge and frame an innocent man. Frame Gavin and kill her to cover it up. She stayed hidden until both men left, then walked back to her car on legs that didn't feel like her own. Inside, she sat in darkness for 20 minutes, trying to process what justice meant when the people sworn to uphold it were the ones destroying it. Her entire worldview was collapsing, brick by brick, replaced by something she didn't recognize. She returned to the mansion just after midnight. Gavin was in his study, backlit by the glow of computer monitors. He looked up when she passed, and for a moment their eyes met. She saw calculation there, assessment, but also something else. A question, maybe, or a recognition that they were both caught in something bigger than either of them understood. The next morning, Marcus's orders came through encrypted channels. Plant the weapon. Wednesday night, 9 p.m., Gavin's office safe. The gun that would match ballistics from Judge Walsh's murder. The gun that would seal both their fates. Melanie held her phone, staring at the message until the screen went dark. She had less than 48 hours. 48 hours to decide whether she was an agent of justice or an accomplice to murder. 48 hours to figure out how to stop a federal conspiracy without getting herself killed in the process. She thought about Gavin, the man she'd spent 6 months learning to despise, learning to fear, the criminal, the monster. Except now the real monsters wore badges and used the law as cover for their crimes. And the man she'd been sent to destroy might be the only person who could help her survive what was coming. Her hand shook as she deleted Marcus's message. Her mind raced through impossible options, each one more dangerous than the last. Follow orders and die. Refuse orders and die. Run and spend the rest of her life looking over her shoulder. Or trust the enemy. Tell Gavin everything. Risk that he'd believe her. Risk that he wouldn't kill her first. Risk that together they might have a chance against forces that wanted them both dead. Melanie had spent 6 months learning Gavin's secrets. Now she had less than 2 days to decide whether she'd die with those secrets or live by trusting the one person she was supposed to destroy. Wednesday, 8 p.m., 2 hours before Judge Catherine Walsh's scheduled assassination. 2 hours before Melanie was supposed to become collateral damage in a conspiracy that would frame an innocent man, or at least a man innocent of this particular crime. She stood outside Gavin's study with the planted gun in her bag, Marcus's orders still fresh in her mind. Place it in the safe. Disappear. Let the machinery of corruption grind forward. Except she couldn't. Because somewhere between the holographic surveillance equipment and the moment she'd heard her handler plot her murder, Melanie Rogers had stopped being a federal agent and started being something else. Something that still believed in justice. Even when justice had abandoned her. She didn't knock, just walked in. Gavin looked up from his desk, his expression unreadable. "You're not here to clean." Melanie reached into her jacket and pulled out her FBI badge. She placed it on his desk with a soft click that sounded like thunder in the quiet room. Then her service weapon. She placed it next to the badge, barrel pointing away from him, safety on. A gesture of surrender. A gesture of trust. "My name is Agent Melanie Rogers. FBI. I've been undercover for 6 months collecting evidence against you." Gavin didn't move. Didn't reach for the weapon, just watched her with those calculating eyes that had seen every betrayal, every angle. I know. The confirmation should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like relief. She continued, her voice steady, despite the tremor in her hands. And in 2 hours, my handler is going to have federal judge Catherine Walsh murdered. Then he's going to have me killed. Then he's going to frame you for both. She slid her phone across the desk. The recording played. Vincent Castellanos' voice, Marcus's voice, the entire conspiracy laid bare in damning detail. Then the photographs she'd taken. The encrypted messages she'd intercepted. The planted gun meant to seal Gavin's fate. Your enemy and my boss are working together, and we're both on their kill list. Gavin listened without interruption, his face carved from stone. When the recording finished, silence filled the study like smoke. Finally, he spoke. Why warn me? You've spent half a year trying to put me in prison. Melanie met his gaze. Because I didn't take an oath to be a murderer's accomplice. I took an oath to the truth. And the truth is that Marcus Voss is more of a criminal than you've ever been. The truth is that Judge Walsh is going to die unless we stop this. The truth is, her voice cracked slightly. The truth is, I'd rather die doing the right thing than live knowing I let this happen. Something shifted in Gavin's expression. Not softness exactly, but recognition. The acknowledgement of someone who understood the kind of calculation, that kind of choice between survival and integrity. He picked up his phone and made a call. Marco, find Judge Catherine Walsh. She's in danger. Protect her. I don't care what it takes. Now. He hung up and turned back to Melanie. You're wearing a wire to Marcus. Tonight. We get his confession on tape. He'll know something's wrong. Then sell it better. You're a federal agent. You've been lying to me for 6 months. Lie to him for 6 minutes. They spent the next hour planning, strategizing, working together like pieces that had always been meant to fit. Gavin called in his people, the ones who were loyal, the ones who understood that sometimes survival meant taking impossible risks. Melanie mapped out Marcus's patterns, his tells, his weaknesses. At 9:30 p.m., she met Marcus at the designated location, a parking garage 3 miles from the mansion. She was wired, Gavin's men positioned in the shadows, every word being recorded by equipment that would hold up in federal court. Marcus leaned against his sedan, arms crossed, suspicion etched into every line of his face. Did you plant the weapon? Melanie's training kicked in. She became the frightened agent, the loyal subordinate. I need to understand something first. Why are you working with Vincent Castellano? Marcus's expression changed. The mask slipped. How did you... I followed you. I saw you meet him. I heard you planning to kill Judge Walsh and frame Howard. I heard you, Her voice broke convincingly. I heard you say I wouldn't be a problem. That I'd be collateral damage. Marcus's hand moved toward his jacket. You were always too smart for your own good, Rogers. Why? We're supposed to be the good guys. We're supposed to uphold the law, not murder federal judges and frame innocent people. Innocent? Marcus laughed, harsh and bitter. Howard is a criminal. He deserves to go down. If I have to bend a few rules, eliminate a few obstacles, that's the price of justice. That's not justice. That's corruption. Marcus pulled his weapon. And you're a loose end. Everything happened at once. Gavin's men moved from the shadows. Marcus fired. The shot went wide as Melanie dove sideways. Gavin himself appeared, tackling Melanie out of the line of fire, his body shielding hers as bullets ricocheted off concrete. Marco and 3 others surrounded Marcus, weapons drawn. Internal affairs agents, the ones Melanie had contacted secretly, the ones who'd been investigating Marcus for months, emerged from vehicles she hadn't even known were there. Marcus was disarmed, surrounded, his face twisted with rage and disbelief. You think this changes anything? You think testimony from a mafia boss and a disgraced agent will stick? Melanie stood up slowly, Gavin's hand steadying her elbow. I think a recording of you confessing to conspiracy to commit murder, working with organized crime, and attempting to kill a federal agent will do just fine. Plus the photographs, plus the financial records I pulled from your offshore accounts, plus the testimony from Judge Walsh, who Marco got to safety 30 minutes ago. The color drained from Marcuse's face. The internal affairs agents moved in, reading Marcus his rights. Melanie watched her handler, her former handler, get handcuffed and pushed into a federal vehicle. 6 months of believing in him, believing in the system, believing that the badge meant something, and now this. Justice, but not the kind she'd expected. Gavin stood beside her, silent, present. When the vehicles pulled away, he spoke quietly. You saved my life tonight. You saved mine too. We're even. Are we? Melanie looked at him. This 45-year-old man who'd built an empire on violence and control, who'd just risked everything to protect a judge he'd never met, and an agent who'd spent 6 months trying to destroy him. I don't know what we are, but I know what I'm not anymore. I'm not FBI. I'm not undercover. I'm not the person who walked into your mansion 8 months ago believing she knew exactly who the monsters were. And who are the monsters? The ones who use power to destroy instead of protect. The ones who hide behind institutions while committing the crimes they're supposed to prevent. The ones who... She stopped. Marcus was supposed to be the good guy, and you were supposed to be the villain. But nothing turned out the way it was supposed to. Gavin didn't answer immediately. Then, come on, let's get you somewhere safe. You're going to need protection until all of this settles, and we need to figure out what comes next. What does come next? That, Gavin said, depends on what you want it to be. 3 weeks later, Melanie stood in her apartment, packing boxes with the mechanical efficiency of someone who'd done this before, moved, relocated, started over. Except this time felt different. This time she wasn't moving towards something. She was moving away from the ruins of everything she'd believed in. Marcus Voss was in federal custody, facing life in prison for conspiracy to commit murder, corruption, obstruction of justice, and about 15 other charges that Internal Affairs had stacked like dominoes. Vincent Castellano had fled the city when his alliance with a federal agent became public, his empire fracturing as former allies scrambled to distance themselves from the scandal. Judge Catherine Walsh had survived, thanks to Marco's intervention, and had personally called Melanie to thank her for the warning that had saved her life. But Melanie's career was over. She'd submitted her evidence, hours of recordings, photographs, financial records that tied Marcus to organized crime, and then she'd submitted her resignation. The Bureau had accepted both. No ceremony, no gratitude, just a quiet acknowledgement that sometimes doing the right thing meant burning everything down, including your own future. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Gavin Howard stood in the hallway, looking incongruous in her shabby apartment building, tailored suit, expensive watch, the kind of presence that commanded attention even in silence. He held a manila folder in one hand. I have a job offer for you. Melanie couldn't help the bitter laugh that escaped. I spent 6 months trying to put you in prison. Why would you trust me? Because you risked everything for the truth. That's more loyalty than I've had in 20 years of blood money and false friendships. Because you could have saved yourself and let me take the fall, but you didn't. Because... He paused. Because I need someone who isn't afraid to tell me the truth, even when the truth is dangerous. He handed her the folder. Inside was a contract. Security consultant. Legitimate salary. Legal operations. Above board. The kind of job that wouldn't require surveillance equipment hidden in dishwater. What's the catch? No catch, but if you take this, things change. I'm tired of running an empire built on violence. Help me transform it into something legitimate. Melanie studied him. This 45-year-old man who'd spent his adult life as a criminal, now asking for redemption. You understand what you're asking? No more illegal operations, no more blood money. We do everything by the law. That's exactly why I need you. I don't know how to build something legitimate, but you do. She set the contract down. I have conditions, full financial transparency. Any operation I don't approve, I walk. And if you lie to me once, just once, we're done. And if I meet those conditions, then maybe, we figure out if a former FBI agent and a former crime boss can actually build something that doesn't end in betrayal and bloodshed. Gavin extended his hand. Deal? They shook hands, partners, equals. Two people who'd spent 6 months as enemies, learning to become something else entirely. 6 months later, the transformation was real. Melanie sat in her office, no longer a maid's quarters, but a legitimate workspace with her name on the door. Director of Security, Howard Industries. The company had been restructured, divested of illegal operations, refocused on legitimate investments in real estate, technology, security consulting. It wasn't perfect. Some deals still had shadows, some associates still made her nervous. But the trajectory was clear, away from the darkness, toward something cleaner. Late one evening, she was reviewing acquisition contracts when Gavin appeared in her doorway. He looked tired but satisfied, the kind of exhaustion that came from honest work rather than constant warfare. Still here? These contracts won't review themselves. Your real estate people are trying to slip in some clauses that would make me very unhappy. He smiled slightly, a rare expression for a man who'd spent decades perfecting intimidation. That's why I hired you, to make sure I don't accidentally become a criminal again. You were never a criminal again. You were always a criminal. We're just making you into a legitimate businessman. Is there a difference? Melanie looked up from the contracts, meeting his gaze. 6 months of working together had created something neither of them had expected. Not romance, though the possibility lingered in quiet moments. Not simple friendship, though loyalty had been proven on both sides. Something more complex. Partnership built on mutual respect, shared survival, the recognition that they'd both been willing to sacrifice everything for principles they hadn't fully understood until tested. You know what the irony is? Melanie said. I spent 6 months learning all your secrets, and I missed the most important one. Which was? That you were capable of this, of change, of being someone worth believing in. Gavin moved into the office, settled into the chair across from her desk. I never thanked you properly for saving my life. You saved mine too. We're even. Are we? The question hung between them, weighted with meaning. The age difference still existed. 18 years separated them. The history still existed. Agent and target, cat and mouse. But none of that seemed to matter as much as the present moment. Two people who'd found each other in the wreckage of betrayal and conspiracy, building something new from the ruins. You know, Melanie said, when I was at Quantico, they taught us to profile criminals, taught us to identify patterns, motivations, psychological markers. They never taught us what to do when the criminal turns out to be more honest than your handler. When the system you trusted betrays you and the monster you were hunting saves your life. And if you were profiling me now, what would you see? She considered the question seriously. I'd see a man trying to escape his past. A man who's discovered that power built on fear is emptier than he thought. A man who's willing to risk everything, including his reputation in his own world, to become someone better. That's generous. It's true. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't. Gavin leaned back, studying her with the same intensity he'd had at 2 a.m. in the kitchen when everything had started. When I caught you washing dishes with that holographic glow lighting up your face, I thought you were the biggest threat I'd ever encountered. I was. No, you were the biggest opportunity. I just didn't know it yet. Melanie felt something shift, subtle but significant. The partnership they'd built over 6 months, the trust earned through crisis and conspiracy, was evolving into something neither of them had planned, but both recognized as inevitable. We should probably establish some ground rules, she said, her professional instinct reasserting itself. Workplace relationships are complicated. Is that what this is? A workplace relationship? I don't know what this is, but I know we're good at working together. I know we trust each other, and I know that trust is rarer than anything else we could build. Gavin nodded slowly. Then we start there, with trust, with partnership, and we see where it goes. No lies. No lies. No going back to the old ways. Never. And if this doesn't work, if we realize we're better as colleagues than anything else, we stay professional. Agreed. Melanie closed the contract folder, decision made. Then let's finish reviewing these contracts together. Because if we're going to build something legitimate, it starts with making sure your real estate division isn't accidentally committing fraud. Gavin laughed, genuine, unrehearsed. 6 months ago, you were trying to put me in prison. Now you're trying to keep me out of prison. That's called growth. They worked together until past midnight. 2 people who'd met as enemies and become partners, building something neither of them had imagined possible. Outside the window, the city lights glittered like scattered stars, and somewhere in the distance, Marcus Voss sat in a federal cell, a cautionary tale about what happened when institutional power corrupted absolutely. But here, in this office, with contracts spread across the desk and coffee going cold in forgotten mugs, Gavin Howard and Melanie Rogers were writing a different ending, one where redemption was possible. One where trust could be built from betrayal. One where a 45-year-old crime boss and a 27-year-old former agent could look at each other and see not criminals or conspirators, but partners choosing to build something better. And sometimes that was the most revolutionary act of all.